Foreign Operations and related programs will come to order. I welcome you all, especially our new members. I don't know, this is not a good sign. But I will mention them anyway, because they'd want us to acknowledge them. Ms. Torres, Ms. Frankel, I think she lost her voice too, Mrs. Roby, and my friend, the former chairman and ranking member, Mr. Rogers. I look forward to a very productive year. Administrator Green, thank you so much for joining us. I am constantly impressed by you and the wealth of experience of our development professionals. USAID helps the world's most vulnerable people, assists in the recovery of millions from natural disasters and conflict, and supports democracy and the rule of law. These development efforts are the front line of our national security. This is a tumultuous time around the world. Globally, democracy is in crisis. The right to free and fair elections, freedom of the press, and the rule of law are under assault. Yemen is on the edge of catastrophe as the world's worst humanitarian crisis, with 20 million civilians facing starvation. The second largest Ebola outbreak ever recorded rages in a fragile Democratic Republic of Congo, resulting in more than 500 deaths so far, including nearly 100 children. Political turmoil in Venezuela continues. More than 3 million people have already fled, and some 25,000 more flee every day in what has been called Latin America's worst ever refugee crisis. In Burma, since 2017, some 700,000 Rohingya. Now it's interesting, some call it, I was having this discussion, Rohingya, some call it Rohingya, whatever you like. Rohingya Muslims have fled their homes in the northern Rakhine province to escape persecution and violence. And in Syria, more than 6 million people are internally displaced, and the vast majority of the 5.6 million refugees in neighboring countries live below the poverty line. It is clear that our humanitarian and development efforts are needed now more than ever. For USAID to succeed in leading these efforts, the agency must have sufficient resources and staffing to nimbly and effectively respond. But several of this administration's policies have hamstrung your agency, reducing, response time and preventing the U.S. from partnering with some of the most capable and experienced implementers. Perhaps no better example is the administration's expansion of the global gag rule and the Kempcastin determination against UNFPA. These terrible policies undermine our effectiveness and make it much harder to reach people who need us most. I can clearly remember my friend, Mr. Green, Administrator Green, and I just have to take a break from these notes because we all have experiences that we will never forget. And I remember visiting a place where birth control was legal. And I think of this woman with all the little babies following her. And I think today, if she were taken to a clinic and that clinic dared to provide any kind of guidance on birth control, they'd be out of business. And this woman would not be able to get any guidance at all. I know you're in a difficult position in this administration, but if I wanted to take the time, I could probably give you another half dozen or more examples where birth control is health, it's survival, and to put these clinics out of business if they are threatened with providing any direction, I think is an abomination. So, my friend, these self-inflicted wounds compromise the quality of our efforts and are a disservice to the American taxpayer. Another example is the administration's suspension of assistance during policy reviews and subsequent breaks in programming that have led to negative, consequences. President Trump also appears to have a flawed view of foreign assistance, in my judgment. As a reward to our friends and its withdrawal, a punishment to our enemies. Moreover, the administration's approach to multilateral engagement, whether it be at the United Nations, the World Bank, or elsewhere, has been reactionary and short-sighted. Our assistance has direct impacts that alleviate suffering, save lives, and enable stability that is essential to our own interests. In our interconnected world, our national security is strongest when development, diplomacy, and defense are all well-funded and equally prioritized. I want to make it very clear, this subcommittee stands ready to work with USAID. To do so effectively will require ongoing, open communication, especially on areas where funding needs are outpacing available resources. Failing to maintain our position as the leader in global development and humanitarian assistance will cost lives, risk the spread of infectious diseases, and reduce American influence around the world. I hope, and I should change that, my friend, to we can count on you and your team to help strengthen communication and consultation with us throughout the 116th Congress. So I thank you very much for testifying today, and I look forward to our discussion. But before we move to your testimony, I'd like to turn to my friend, Mr. Rogers, the ranking member. We just take turns, but I don't want to take any more turns in the next year. The ranking member for his opening statement. And then I want to make it clear, I'll call on members based on seniority of the members who were present when the hearing was called to order. I will alternate between majority and minority. Each member is asked to keep their questions to within 5 minutes per round. And Administrator Green. Did I say I was going to call on you next? I got a little mixed up here. That's what happens when you can't talk. Administrator Green will be happy to place your full testimony in the record. If you would be kind enough to summarize your oral statement, I want to make sure we leave enough time to get to questions. Mr. Green. I will turn to Mr. Rogers. That's what happens when you don't have a voice. Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Congratulations on your accomplishment, historic accomplishment, being the first female chairman of the full committee. I know it's...
There's was a kind of plan? How was my voice taken away as the first woman? I don't know what's going on around
No,
here.
it can't be.
Yeah. I know it's going to be difficult to fill both the roles of being a full committee chairman and this subcommittee chair as well, but I'm pleased that you're staying on and leading the subcommittee, and I look forward to working with you and being helpful as we can along the way. You and I have had a great working relationship down through the years of time in various roles, and I've found you to be very effective and reliable and honest and true and above board. So I appreciate our friendship. Ambassador Green, it's a pleasure to welcome you back to your old stomping grounds here on the Hill. You spent a good number of years, was it 4 terms on the Hill, and a member of this body. Among your other accomplishments, we appreciate your service up here. And it's good to see you again for your 3rd appearance testifying before this subcommittee as aid administrator. You've demonstrated your willingness to appear when called upon to engage our members in a meaningful conversation about your work at USAID. I asked this of you in your first hearing as administrator in this very room. I believe you're upholding your end of the bargain, and I sincerely appreciate that. I'd hoped this hearing would allow us to discuss the President's budget request for fiscal 2020. If the speculation holds true, we're looking at another proposal for steep cuts in the international affairs budget being recommended in the President's budget, despite being roundly rejected by Congress for 2 years in a row now. Unfortunately, the budget submission has been delayed until mid-March, so we'll need to have those discussions at another time. Therefore, today we're going to focus on oversight. USAID plays an important role in contributing to our country's national security. Across the globe, AID is on the front lines, promoting democracy, growing economies, reducing disease, providing life-saving humanitarian assistance. That's why it's critical to make sure USAID is the most efficient and effective agency it can be. Taxpayers should feel confident their resources are being invested wisely, and they should be proud of what is accomplished overseas on their behalf. You're fortunate to have a capable Inspector General keeping an eye on the agency. She and her staff have done important work to help you achieve greater transparency and increased effectiveness. And I know you take her recommendations seriously and have made progress addressing them here lately. But there are some challenges that never seem to get resolved. They get written up year after year. I'll probably return to this topic with a question, but I'm concerned that the USAID IG continues to raise the issue of vulnerabilities in financial management. These are the fundamentals, basics of tracking each and every dollar. I understand you've made some improvement recently, but that doesn't mean you should take your foot off the gas. I discussed this and other issues at a hearing with the Inspector General when I became chair of this subcommittee, and I intend to follow it until it gets resolved. I strongly encourage you and your management team to remain focused on making this an agency strength rather than a perennial challenge. The situation in Venezuela, topic of great interest, of course. The Maduro regime has caused desperate conditions in Venezuela, has threatened counter-narcotics efforts and economic development throughout the region. In turn, this has forced unprecedented numbers of Venezuelans to flee their home. The outcome of this political crisis will have a substantial impact on Latin America for decades to come. I know you intend to address this in your remarks, so I look forward to hearing your update. I hope you will address other important topics such as your agency's role in countering Russian and Chinese influence around the world, efforts to suppress our partners in the Near East that continue to face turbulent times, and critical investments being made in global health security. Before I close, I want to thank the men and women of USAID for their continued hard work and their commitment. I know the shutdown was difficult, sometimes demoralizing for so many federal employees, including USAID. I hope their dedication to their mission will stay strong, and I look forward to doing what we can to support them in that effort. I know, Mr. Administrator, that you must be weary. You've been on the road, the air, if you will, for these many months. I understand you were in Colombia recently, twice in 4 days, I think. So we're glad to have you back here. We hope to give you a little rest amidst your troubles. I yield back.
Thank you. Again, Administrator Green will be happy to place your full testimony into the record. If you would be kind enough to summarize your oral statement. I want you to do whatever you're comfortable with. I want to make sure, though, that we leave enough time to get to everyone's questions. Mr. Green, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. And up front, I apologize for my voice. I picked something up on one of those travels, and until this morning, I actually thought I was winning. Now I'm not so sure, but I appreciate the forbearance of the committee. So, Chairwoman Lowy, Ranking Member Rogers, members, it's good to be with you, and thank you for this opportunity. I'd like to begin this morning by discussing USAID's efforts to address a few of our more pressing humanitarian and development situations across the world. As many of you have alluded to, at USAID, we have urgent work to do, and that work has never been more important. To name one, I have just returned from Cúcuta, Colombia, a short distance from the border with Venezuela. There I saw firsthand the devastating effects of the Maduro regime's corruption, economic mismanagement, and oppression. I heard stories of unimaginable suffering, children starving, hospitals running out of medicine, and people walking, in some cases, hundreds of miles over several days to reach the border in search of help. Of course, this tragedy is all the worse because Venezuela was once one of the region's wealthiest countries. At the request of interim President Juan Guaido, we have been pre-positioning humanitarian assistance close to the border for eventual delivery into Venezuela. While in Cúcuta last week, I welcomed the arrival of a new tranche of humanitarian assistance. Since February 4th, USAID, with support from the Department of Defense and state and others, has pre-positioned approximately 195 metric tons of crucial relief supplies, including emergency medical kits, food aid, hygiene kits, and nutritional supplies. This past weekend, as I'm sure you were watching, this past weekend was tragic, as thousands of Venezuelan, Colombian, and other humanitarian volunteers sought to transport life-saving food and medical supplies into Venezuela. They were met with death, tear gas, rubber bullets, and violence ordered by the Maduro regime. The United States, over the last couple of years, has contributed more than $195 million in funding to support Venezuelan migrants and the communities hosting them. We're far from alone in that effort. 54 countries now recognize the interim presidency of Juan Guaido. Many of our closest allies have pledged assistance, and many private citizens have already provided assistance to the region. However, as I know you agree, in order to fully respond to these crises, we need to address their underlying causes. Just as we lead the world in humanitarian assistance, we should also lead in our commitment to democracy, human rights, and citizen-responsive governance. USAID stands in solidarity with interim President Guaido and those in Venezuela who seek a government that represents their interests and is responsive to their needs. So long as Maduro and his cronies continue to crush the people of Venezuela, their economy, and their hope, we know this crisis will continue. The people of Venezuela, like those in Cuba and Nicaragua who are also suffering under authoritarianism, deserve freedom and a return to rule of law. Some observers talk as though democracy is in irreversible decline, but the only way that freedom and democracy will fall is if we let them. As President Trump recently said in Miami, we can see the day ahead when all the people of Latin America will at last be free. Members of the subcommittee were hard at work at addressing another humanitarian crisis, this one of a fundamentally different nature. The outbreak of Ebola in the Democratic Republic of Congo, where health officials have recorded at least 869 confirmed cases and 544 related deaths, all since 2018, should be of concern to all of us. USAID disaster and health experts, part of the U.S. government's disaster assistance response team, are on the ground working side by side with WHO and the Ministry of Health in DRC. The team is applying tools and valuable lessons learned developed in the 2014 epidemic response in West Africa. The strategy is to break the chain of transmission and ultimately end the outbreak. It's a complex working environment. Poor access to certain areas, security concerns, and community distrust have presented remarkable hurdles to our work. But despite these challenges, responders are conducting their vital work in affected areas, including surveillance and case finding, case management, and raising community awareness about transmission. We'll continue to monitor and adapt accordingly in coordination with our colleagues from the CDC. This response is a priority not only because of our commitment to those affected, but also to prevent the outbreak from spreading throughout the broader region and, quite frankly, beyond. Unfortunately, we're experiencing humanitarian crises in nearly every corner of the world. And what makes the tragedy of the Rohingya even more painful is that, similar to Venezuela, it's entirely man-made. Bangladesh now hosts 1 million Rohingya refugees from Burma, as well as the world's largest refugee camp. 730,000 of these migrants arrived in the wake of an ethnic cleansing campaign conducted by the Burmese security forces that began in August 2017. I traveled to Bangladesh last May to visit the refugee camps and to hear from those who escaped the violence and bloodshed. I met with government representatives. I conveyed America's gratitude to Bangladesh for hosting the refugees. But I also encouraged them to allow humanitarian organizations to provide refugees with the full range of support necessary for their well-being, not just food assistance and health care, but access to education, weather-resistant shelter, and livelihood opportunities. USAID, in close coordination with state, continues to provide emergency food and nutrition assistance to refugees in Bangladesh. We're also working to ensure that host communities are not overly burdened by the significant population influx. And we continue to call on the government of Burma to take concrete actions to respect the dignity and the rights of all Rohingya in Burma to return voluntarily, safely, and in a dignified manner. Members of the subcommittee, those are just a few of the most pressing situations at the forefront of our work. But I would also like to say a quick word about USAID's redesign process or transformation. When I last appeared before the committee in March of 2018, I provided an overview of several planned initiatives. After consultations with many of you and your staff, we have since launched many of them, and we are eager to answer any questions that you might have as you look to review our remaining notifications. As you've heard me say before, private enterprise is perhaps the most powerful force on earth for lifting lives out of poverty, strengthening communities, and building self-reliance. And so just in December, we launched the agency's first ever private sector engagement strategy. This policy is a call to action to increase and strengthen our work with the private sector, moving beyond mere contracting and grant making to true collaboration, co-design, and co-financing. Another key initiative, and Chairwoman Lowy, I have to thank your unbending leadership on this issue, aims to enhance a core aspect of our work, improving learning outcomes, especially for marginalized youth and communities in need. One aspect of USAID's new education policy that I'm especially excited about is its focus on ensuring that we tailor our education programs to the unique needs of each country. We're engaging all stakeholders in order to deliver quality, sustainable education. This includes universities, traditional education institutions, and where appropriate, private sector, faith-based organizations, and more. These new education strategies will ensure that we're considering every innovation to achieve the very best possible learning outcomes. Finally, I would like to mention USAID's support for the White House-led Women's Global Development and Prosperity Initiative, also known as WGDP. On February 7th, I joined Ivanka Trump in launching this initiative and announced USAID's new fund to support and scale up innovative programs that advance women's economic empowerment around the world. This fund will have an initial allocation of $50 million and will support high-impact proposals, including those that support training and skills development, expand access to finance, and reduce barriers to women's free and full participation in the economy. Members of the subcommittee, with your support and guidance, we will ensure that USAID remains the world's premier international development agency. And with that, Madam Chairwoman, thank you again for the opportunity to appear and to continue our conversation. I welcome questions. Thank you, Madam.
Thank you very much. Do you need a lozenge, by the way? I have a...
Between the two of us, I don't think we're doing so well.
A pleasure to welcome you, Mr. Administrator. A few weeks ago, the administration rolled out the Women's Global Development and Prosperity Program, or WGDP. Now, as you well know, I fully support increasing women's economic empowerment. The inconsistency, however, of this administration's policies in such an important issue is baffling. And I won't say just Ivanka Trump. I'll talk about the whole administration, because you and I know that financing alone won't solve this problem. Our programs will not be effective if we don't see women and their challenges holistically and to address the environment in which they are raising their families and supporting their communities. So do you believe this administration has put the policies in place to effectively encourage women to take advantage of economic opportunities? You'll probably say yes, so I'll let you give a quick response.
Yes.
I wouldn't want to put words in your mouth. I wouldn't even think of that. I hope we can work together on WGDP. But is this administration reconsidering its stance on funding for important women's health and education programs that would be necessary for women to better contribute economically?
The administration, in terms of women's education, very much is looking to boost women's education and to tackle the barriers to women's education. As part of the WGDP initiative, we're taking a look at all the, country by country, all of the barriers to participation in the economy.
Including health barriers specific to women?
We're taking a look at health barriers, all the barriers.
I hope you look very, very carefully at the health barriers that this administration advocates. So let me be very specific. Will the administration reverse its position on an expanded gag rule or misguided prohibition on UNFPA funds to ensure women are able to take advantage of this new initiative?
I'll give you a two-part answer. In coming weeks, we will be producing, as we have pledged to do, a report on the impact of the Protecting Life and Global Health Assistance policy announced 2 years ago. We'll make that report public. I do not believe that it will be reversing its standing position and policy.
I thank you, frankly, for your frank answer. As I mentioned before, I've traveled to so many places, and you see what empowerment of the women does when they can have appropriate women's health advice and assistance. The last USAID administrator under a Republican administration, Henrietta Fore, launched the Development Leadership Initiative with a vision to double the number of permanent Foreign Service officers at your agency. And I was so proud to support this initiative when I was last chair of this subcommittee. In fact, the Development Leadership Initiative garnered strong bipartisan support in recognition of the invaluable role USAID personnel play in our national security. The Obama administration continued this Bush administration initiative, but this administration has significantly reduced staffing. Can you respond? I know I just have a few seconds left.
As you know, a year plus ago, we were under a hiring freeze. Since then, we have taken steps to hire approximately 140 career Foreign Service officers, which we will do between now and the end of fiscal year 2020, which is in line with available OE budget. And beyond that, we will continue to hire staff and begin to power up since the freeze was lifted.
Maybe I can ask you directly, should USAID be expanding, or is your current staffing level sufficient? And what is the impact of the dramatic workforce reductions, including on morale and workload?
So we will be expanding our staff in line with available budget. So it's not a set number. It's making sure that we have the right people in the right place to do the jobs that are necessary. I can tell you that during the lapse in appropriations, in which a good percentage of our staff were furloughed, that did delay a number of operations that we would normally take on, including oversight. So when we have staff reductions like that, it certainly hurts our effectiveness.
Well, I thank you very much. And before I turn this over to Ranking Member Rogers, I want to say this committee, I know traditionally, whether Chairman Rogers is in charge, I'm in charge, and all the members are passionate about the important work of USAID and feel there have been some mistakes, wrong-headedness in terms of the cuts. So we're happy to be your partner. We're happy to have open and honest discussions and continue to support the very essential work that you are doing. So thank you for appearing before us today. Mr. Rogers.
Mr. Administrator, China. Anecdotally, all of us in various trips into the world have noticed of late very active Chinese involvement in that country. They've emerged as a major provider of bilateral aid, export credits, infrastructure financing, symbolized by their very ambitious Belt and Road Initiative, they call it. Unless the U.S. and most Western donors, unlike us, China's lending policies are not guided by standards of anti-corruption, transparency, or the ability to pay the loan back, sustainability. Many of us are concerned that this model gives Chinese companies a big advantage in emerging markets and allows Beijing to use large projects as a way to gain geostrategic influence and power. Understanding that the U.S. response must involve many agencies, what is USAID's role and strategy to counter the China model of development around the world?
Thank you, Ranking Member, for that question. It's a topic that I'm passionate about. First and foremost, when you ask countries why they accept or turn to China, in most cases they'll say because they're there, and the U.S. is not. So the first answer is we need to engage in more places more often with countries. I think we need to be there and show what it is that we offer. Secondly, I think we need to do a better job in helping countries analyze the terms of what China offers. You and I wouldn't really refer to what China does as assistance. It's predatory financing is what it is. And so I think helping countries to be able to analyze the cost benefits of the China package is important. Most importantly, we have to be clear about what it is that we offer and what the end game is. So what I say is, in many of these countries, it's a choice between self-reliance, which is what you get at the end of your partnership with us, the ability to lead yourself, provide for yourself, guide your own future, versus servitude, in which you are in perpetuity indebted to an authoritarian power. I think we should be full-throated in pointing out the clear differences. So I think it's a combination of all of them. We've got to be there. I think we have to do a better job in describing what it is that we offer, and I think we have to do a better job in describing the downside, the cost of what China offers. Finally, I think that the new DFC, which will be coming online towards the end of the year, is an important tool in the toolbox. We shouldn't try to be China light. We shouldn't get into a bidding war with China. But what we can do with quality financing from the DFC and other parts of the U.S. government is incentivize the kinds of policy reforms that can help a country rise. Every country wants to lead itself, and we want to make it clear that we can help them get there.
Well, it's a juggernaut. The Chinese have launched a juggernaut. They're all over the world, and they're pouring billions of dollars into questionable loans, grants, for projects that probably will never see the light of day, but they have made their presence there. And they made friends.
If I can, a term that I heard in talking to some businesses in Latin America, they said that they refer to Chinese assistance as loan to own, because there really is no sense of providing financing. It's essentially indebtedness that will allow China to take over assets.
Yeah. And we've never seen anything quite like this, have we? Let me quickly switch to Venezuela. A lot of focus on the situation inside Venezuela, and rightly so. You've provided us with a helpful overview of recent events. We'd like to hear more about what we've done and will do for other countries in the region that have been strained by the more than 3 million people that have fled Venezuela. Could you help us out with that?
Thank you, and it's an important question. One of the things that makes Venezuela different in terms of its scope is the fact that it is happening as we speak. As the chairwoman pointed out, we're seeing the flight of migrants increase each and every day, getting on for 4 million now, and it's affecting the entire region. So we've been providing assistance to host countries to support those migrants who have come over, as well as the communities that are in fact hosting them. It is moving as far as the Caribbean, where the economies, just by World Bank numbers, may be prosperous, but they're fragile. If they're tourism-oriented, you can see how the sudden presence of migrants would be burdensome. So we've been trying to provide some support there. This is not a bilateral problem. It's not U.S. Venezuela. This is a problem, a challenge that affects the entire region, and that's why it's receiving the attention, and it should be.
I think my time has expired.
Mr. Rogers. Ms. Lee.
Good to see you, Mr. Ambassador. First, thank you for being here. Thank you for your leadership. I have several questions. I apologize, I have to go to another hearing, so I'm going to try to summarize my questions all in one round. Of course, I've been concerned about the Trump administration's cuts to UNFPA and the impacts that these cuts have on the health and well-being of women and girls around the world. As you know, UNFPA provides critical voluntary reproductive health care, including family planning services, to the world's poorest women living in over 150 countries around the world. Now, I know you have previously stated the USAID was in the process of reprogramming U.S. funds that were going to UNFPA, but we never got a handle on where those funds were reprogrammed for, what accounts they went into, and you know, how in the world now are you ensuring that women and girls are in vulnerable situations, such as the child health care and refugee camps in Jordan? How are they accessing care now, given the shift in funds? Secondly, so I'd like to know what accounts they're going into. Secondly, of course, I'm back talking about democracy programs in Cuba. Of course, the Zunzaneo program, covert Cuban Twitter designed to stir unrest, funding for Radio Marti and Television Marti. I believe it's waste of taxpayer money. And we've learned recently that it was TV Marti, described as an anti-Semitic segment against George Soros. I don't know if you conducted an investigation or not, but why are we continuing to fund these programs, wasting taxpayer dollars? And what is the status of the investigations into all of the, I think, wasted money? And is USAID playing a constructive role in what seems to be really an organic opening in Cuba? There are about 830 Wi-Fi hotspots. And so, of course, we know under the Obama administration, we moved toward at least trying to normalize relations and engage in some dialogue and some diplomacy, but yet now, under Trump, the policies have turned us back, and so I'm wondering what your assessment is on the Cuban people in terms of curbing trade and travel. My next question just has to do with HIV and AIDS in terms of country ownership and our countries, which we all agree need to happen, but is the groundwork established to insist on country ownership? And then finally, what are we doing in the West Indies and the Caribbean? We discussed this a little bit, but I know there's been very little involvement in the West Indies and the mainly black Caribbean countries, and I do know that China is, of course, there, and I'm wondering why we haven't engaged much in the West Indies. So thank you again.
Thank you, Congresswoman Lee. You may be in and out, but you've gotten all of your questions in, and I'll attempt to address them as best I can. And I enjoyed our conversation yesterday. So first, with respect to UNFPA and the reprogramming of dollars. With respect to last year's funding, the 2017 fiscal year funds, those funds were put into maternal and reproductive health voluntary family planning and maternal and reproductive health activities in priority countries. In addition, part of the money was used for the prevention of cervical cancer in Malawi and Mozambique as part of an integrated program on women's health. With respect to fiscal year 18 funds, those are still being under review, and we will supply a congressional notification to your office to make clear our intention as to where those funds will go. So, as always, we'll make sure that we're very clear where those funds go. With respect to Cuba, we have increased humanitarian assistance in Cuba to political prisoners, and we do continue to provide access to independent media as much as we can in Cuba. With respect to the precise question you asked, I'll have to get back to you. My office will supply a written response. I just am not entirely familiar with that. On PEPFAR, I support Ambassador Birx's efforts to begin to build stronger sustainability of our PEPFAR investments in some of the countries that have increasing capacity. I think we all recognize that in the long run, the right answer in nearly every sector is to help countries to be able to lead themselves. In the case of health systems in countries with high AIDS, HIV/AIDS burdens, it's building their capacity, slowly getting them to mobilize more and more of their own domestic resources so that eventually, sustainably, they can take over leadership themselves. That is what Ambassador Birx is trying to do. Obviously, USAID is part of the larger PEPFAR effort, and we are committed to doing that. It is challenging in many environments, but we think it's important. With respect to the Caribbean and the West Indies in particular, as we discussed yesterday, I appreciate and quite frankly welcome your passion on this. These nations are our neighborhood, and I think that we should engage them more and as much as we can. We often engage only during moments of humanitarian crisis when there are storms and other natural disasters, and I'm proud of the fact that we do. It would be nice to engage with them outside of storms and natural disasters. Those relationships are important. And again, I think that if we can bolster the economic vitality of our own neighborhood, the Americas, the Western Hemisphere, I think every American benefits. I think it's good for us as well as being good for them. So you have my commitment to sit down and work with you on that. I share your passion. I think it's great.
Excuse me.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I hope you feel better. Before I make my comments, if I could ask Ms. Lee a question. Are you coming back to the hearing? The reason I ask is I know you have a particular passion for Haiti, and I have some questions in that regard. If you're coming back, I'll probably save those for later.
I'm not sure. No, go on.
I have to do it by myself then.
Yeah,
Okay.
thank you
I'll
very
let
much.
know.
But I'm sure I associate myself with your
Okay.
remarks on Haiti.
Thank you. Thank you. Again, thank you, Madam Chair, for the time. And frankly, it's a privilege for me to serve on this subcommittee. Mr. Administrator, I never frankly know what to call you. Congressman, Administrator, Ambassador, or Mark. So welcome.
Mark works well.
Mark is okay, yes. Thank you for your long-held leadership in public service. Really grateful. Before I ask you a few questions, starting with Northern Iraq, I'd like to give a few reflective comments. I think that the United States Agency for International Development, that title doesn't appropriately capture the fullness of what we're trying to do here. And if I had the chance to rename this would obviously have to be shortened. But I do believe you have one of the most important jobs in the country, perhaps the world, because it is about a couple fundamental things: promoting human dignity, attacking the root causes of structural poverty, and attempting to create and imagine a 21st century architecture for diplomatic relations that's based in authenticity, in service, and this is the key point, in service to America's humanitarian impulse, international stability, and our own national security. Now, if you can find a way to take all of that and press it into a new title, I think we could rename the agency, because I think it's broader than the two words international development captures, and I know you have a particular passion for this, and I'm grateful for your service. You did mention we have humanitarian crises all over the world. And again, I think all of us who have been given this great gift of public service have to reflect on the more fundamental question as to why. We can move economic aid, we can move assistance, but why do we continue to have these humanitarian crises, especially in an age of unprecedented prosperity in some places, unprecedented development of the sciences and technology? The world is still screaming for meaning. And ultimately, I think that meaning is found in the philosophical proposition of human dignity. Let me fast forward, and I'd like to, Madam Chair, I haven't had a chance to visit with you about this, but if we could do so privately, I'd appreciate it. Administrator Green and I traveled to northern Iraq last summer. And what we were doing there at the request of the Vice President's office is to evaluate the aid programs that are targeted to the religious minorities that once flourished in northern Iraq. Christian communities, Yazidi communities, certain minority Muslim communities once formed an ancient mosaic tapestry of religious pluralism. The Iraq War and then the consequences of ISIS and their genocide, their twisted, dark ideology has decimated these peoples. So the United States, again, very generously has transferred aid. I believe it's near $200 million. My findings were that there is possibility that this aid has the potential impact that we desire, a regeneration of these communities, helping Iraq save, again, once was a vibrant disposition toward pluralism. The situation, though, is urgent. The Christian community has trickled back. The Yazidi community, many of whom are trapped in refugee camps. There will be pressures for out-migration, more than there have been if we don't act quickly. But the more fundamental issue is security. Without security, there is really little prospect that the aid that we are giving and other countries are giving is sustainable in the long run. So, Mr. Administrator, I've talked too much. I've chewed up a lot of my time, but I'd like you to respond to that prospect. And what I'm trying to do is, working with Chairman Engel and McCall, get a resolution through Congress that lays down a marker talking to this issue of security and integrating, frankly, Christians and Yazidis and minority Muslim communities into the Iraqi security forces with some authority to protect themselves. Mr. Administrator, if you could respond to this.
Thank you for your question and for your concern. And obviously, you and I have had a number of conversations about this. I've been struck by the way that the Iraq government, in its approach to the flourishing diversity that was once there in northern Iraq, how they refer to it. They don't refer to minorities, they refer to component communities, with the idea being that Iraq cannot be whole if it's missing those key components. We do believe, I do agree, that if we are to defeat ISIS once and for all, we must undo some of what it tried to do, which was to destroy that diversity of freedom of a conscience. And so we think it's important work to be done. Yazidis, Christians, as you pointed out, a range of minorities. There are two pieces to it. As you know, and thanks in part to your leadership, we are providing valuable assistance to these communities to try to provide the infrastructure that allows them to return and to have economic livelihood. The two challenges that I see, which will determine whether we're successful in the long run, are number one, they must not argue amongst themselves. In other words, they cannot allow the fragmentation of the communities to finish the job that ISIS started in terms of breaking apart what was a wonderful mosaic. But most importantly is security. And as I often say, I'm not in the wish projection business. I try to be clear-eyed. And unless these communities feel as though there is some security around them, I find it hard to believe that they will either stay or return, as you and I both hope they will. So I think addressing security is a key part of our long-term success.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I just want to say to my colleague, I remember to this day, I won't mention names, at a caucus meeting, the name of the person who gave us that briefing on what happened in Iraq. And I voted for that war. It was probably the most misguided vote I ever took in my life. And I agree with you, the impact and the suffering that has taken, you know, when you have kids, much easier to build than to build after you've broken something. So that was a tragedy, and I look forward to working with you on this enormous challenge. And I know my good friend feels the same. Well, I won't say you agree with everything I just said, but we have an enormous job to do. And I thank you again on that effort as well. Ms. Torres, a pleasure, a new member of the committee, and we're delighted to welcome you here today.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here with all of you. Thank you so much for being here, Mr. Green. As you know, I have traveled extensively within the Western Hemisphere and have looked at all of the work that USAID is doing, and I am grateful and I'm a fan of the work that is being done by your employees that I think are just wonderful ambassadors of the U.S. as we continue to look for opportunities to expand democracy within our hemisphere. So you have a big job. Part of that is dealing with the issues of public corruption. In the 2019 budget justification for Guatemala, USAID programs were to address corruption by improving internal controls and transparency of public financial management and procurement at the national and local levels. We were to help them increase transparency. How is that happening, and what is your assessment within the Guatemalan government? Recent actions have been tearing at the rule of law, violating the rule of law, have been tearing at the work that we have been focused on doing there. In Honduras, look at $4.4 million were to go to NGOs to serve as watchdogs for government actions, to conduct social audits and evaluations of government programs and services, and advocate for reforms and promote transparency there again and accountability. Can you talk about those two countries and what is the progress there? And I know that the administration was calling on a review of the funding within the Northern Triangle. What is the status of that review, the assistance that we are providing to the Northern Triangle? El Salvador has elected a new president. We're all hopeful. My glass is always half full, but we will see.
Thank you for the questions and also for your passion for the region. We think it's very important. First off, you raise the issue of corruption and impunity in those three countries in particular, and it's right for you to raise and elevate that concern because it really touches almost every other aspect of their economy, their governance, and the environment that too often drives people to leave their homes and head northward. With respect to Guatemala, what I can say is some of the investments that we've made, the support of the Special Prosecutor's Office for Extortion and Anti-Corruption, it's helped increase the number of final verdicts in extortion cases from 26 in 2015 to 512 in 2017. The number found guilty of extortion increased from 41 to 735 over the same period of time.
I have had several meetings with the Attorney General in Guatemala, Ms. Porras. Those numbers sound really great, but we're talking about the little guy, right? Yeah. We're talking about, the little guy hitting up the liquor store or the convenient supermarket or the restaurant. The major cases of public corruption, dealing with members of Congress, narco-traffickers in Congress. We have yet to hear about those.
I wish I could tell you that we had easy wins and victories to point to in there. It's difficult work. It is very difficult work. We will continue with it. I share your concerns and your priorities.
So as far as how much money has been spent in helping to improve the justice system, the judicial system in Guatemala?
I'll have to get back to you. I don't have that number at
Okay.
my fingertip.
Okay. I apologize for not meeting with you ahead of time. I don't like to do the surprise questions.
No, we'll make sure we get that to you.
Okay, will you continue with Honduras?
Yes, yes. So in Honduras, our support has been to the mission to support the fight against corruption and impunity in Honduras. It's enabled the hiring of a record number of anti-corruption judges, prosecutors, and investigators in Honduras. And so working closely with the National Attorney General, it has achieved 3 high-profile convictions and taken on 3 other high-profile corruption cases. So it's beginning to show some progress. And I agree with you, as you alluded to in Guatemala, sort of getting the big fish, if you will, is not only important for a sense of justice, but symbolically, message sending. So we will continue to push and to provide support where we can. We think your priorities are well placed.
Thank you. My time is up and I yield back.
Just want to say before I turn to the next person, to my friend, Ms. Torres, I was part of the administration's strategy led by Vice President Biden. And if I recall, Mr. Green, there was $3 billion appropriated over 4 years for the triangle strategy. But I think you ask a very important question, and I'd love to have a follow-up meeting with you to see. I'm not sure at this point whether all that money was spent. In some areas, did it accomplish something? The reports we get back, and I know you get back, are extremely serious. People's lives are at stake. So I would like to follow up with you at some time to talk about that money. Unless you know right now how much of that $4 billion was spent, and then did it accomplish anything before our friend goes to another hearing.
I don't know off the top of my head. I will make sure that we have a briefing for you, but it's great, and I really appreciate the interest. This is, again, it's our neighborhood. This is important.
Thank you, and thank you. Welcome to the committee, and thank you for bringing up an important issue. And I'm delighted to turn it over to Madam Roby, Ms. Roby.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and Administrator Green, thank you for being here. Thank you for your service, and I appreciate all the time that you spent with me yesterday. It's been a hectic couple of days, so I appreciate your flexibility. And Madam Chair and our leader, Mr. Rogers, I just want to tell you how grateful I am to be a member of this committee. I look forward to working with all of you. This is a very distinguished group of members of Congress, so I'm very honored to get to join you here in this subcommittee. So, thank you. A couple of things that we talked about yesterday, and I'll just throw them out there and then give you an opportunity to respond. We had talked about some success stories between coordination between USAID and DOD, and I wanted to give you an opportunity to kind of expand on that. Also, as you know, my interest has been mostly focused on Afghanistan. Over the past 8 years, I've spent quite a bit of time traveling there, and there are programs that are in place that there's been a little bit of frustration in terms of measuring outcomes instead of inputs. And one of the things that we also talked about was a change in the metrics of how you demonstrate that the investments are equating to positive outcomes. And so that also is of interest to me. And you can talk about that across the board, but you know my interest has been mainly focused on in Afghanistan. And then I would leave you with just an open-ended question is what do you need from Congress right now to continue the work of the agency? And in the immediate future, what do you foresee as being pressing policy or budgetary matters that we need to be aware of so that you can continue to do the work that you do?
Great, thank you. In terms of civ-mil relations, it's probably one of the best-kept secrets in terms of our work. We work very closely with the Department of Defense, largely in two different areas. First off, let me say that we have 23 staff from USAID who are embedded either at the Pentagon or in the combatant commands, and it's been that way for the last several years, certainly in crisis response. A few weeks into my tenure as administrator, we were responding to the second earthquake that hit Mexico City. And it was a crisis, as you can imagine. There were people trapped in buildings. After a phone call from Mexico Ministry of Foreign Affairs, as well as from the White House, we turned around, worked with our partners at DOD, and we were able to get a search and rescue team there by the next morning before breakfast. That's a clear case of where we partner with DOD to move our humanitarian people in the most quick, effective way that we possibly can. More importantly, we work closely with DOD in stabilization efforts. So in conflict zones where there is success in the battlefield, you only really lock up that success if you replace the vacuum with citizen-responsive institutions that begin to create a culture in which people have a stake in the survival of the community. And that's what we do. And that's what DOD doesn't want to do. And so we work hand in hand. I traveled with General Votel to Raqqa, Syria, to take a look at our stabilization work there. So it's a wonderful relationship. We think it works well, and we look forward to it continuing to grow. With respect to Afghanistan, obviously a difficult working environment for a number of reasons. Part of what we're trying to do in Afghanistan is to create economic vibrancy, to create inclusive development that stabilizes some of the areas that have been rocked by years of conflict. We helped the government of Afghanistan launch air cargo corridors that connect the country to markets in India and in the Gulf, in Europe. We've been working with the government of India, in which we bring young Afghan women craftsmen, if you will, to India to be trained in how to market and to run small businesses and then bring them back. And I've seen some of that firsthand. What we try to do in our metrics is to not so much look at outputs as take a look at outcomes. Our view is that every country wants to lead itself, and so we should take a look at what the impediments are to its self-reliance, recognizing that every country is in a different place in its journey, and every country has got external factors that have affected it, and Afghanistan is certainly one of them. But we're working to try to build their regulatory capacity and their access to markets so that hopefully we have a vibrant market-based economy for the future.
My time is up, but I want to ask you that before my next trip, specifically to Afghanistan, I would love an opportunity to sit down with you to go over the specific programs and really drill down so that I'll have an opportunity to ask questions while there. So thank you, and thank you, Madam Chair. And you can respond to my last question some other time, but I'm sure you'll let us know.
Most definitely, we'd be happy to provide a briefing and show you projects while you're there.
And I would like to say, Ms. Roby, I look forward to working with you. And I can remember the number of girls. It was about 1 million girls which were in school. I don't know if those 1 million girls are still in school. And it's become harder and harder. And you've been there so many times. I've been there several times to actually go out and see the schools and see if they're there. In fact, I do recall an incredible Afghan woman who was member of their Congress, and their daughter was killed not too long ago. You probably remember that too, because she looked so much like her mother. But I think education of girls has been a key priority of us, and I would really appreciate the opportunity to do more and to get an update from you. How many girls, women are in schools now? And are those schools still in existence? And are they still enabling other girls to have that opportunity, among other issues? Thank you for your work.
The only response I have is that your priorities are well placed, that inclusive development's the key to Afghanistan, not merely development, but inclusive development that creates a broader investment by all parts of the community. Women and girls for too long have been entirely marginalized, and we know that is inherently unstable and inherently doesn't produce the development outcomes that we all want to see, including the Afghans themselves.
And there has been Ms. Roby and Ms. Davis and other women members. I don't know if you allow men to go with you on those trips. Not on that one. But they've been keeping up on these issues, so I thank you, and we look forward to I'm so pleased that we were joined by Mr. Price. There are many hearings at the same time, so we can turn to you if you're ready to ask a question.
I think I better be ready, right? Lest we miss the chance here. Good morning. I do apologize for the back and forth act here with all the different hearings. I want to let you know about a request that you already have, and I will not dwell on it because I want to move to another question. But we really do appreciate your long history with and support of the House Democracy Partnership, the work we do with emerging democracies in legislative strengthening in particular. I am going to submit a question for the record. I think your staff's already got this underway. We want to make sure we have a good baseline as to where legislative strengthening has gone on, where it is still going on, how much of this is USAID contracts, how much may be happening through other auspices, and so forth. So we do want to support that work and would appreciate a good information baseline. I want to address West Bank funding. And I come to this with some evidence brought to me by constituents who have worked for many years in the West Bank, and in particular with the school in Bethlehem, the Hope Flowers School. These constituents were there a few weeks ago. They've seen the work done there to help Palestinian children. The chairman and I have visited this school some years ago. They've worked for years teaching nonviolence, citizenship, social and community skills. Using USAID grant, the Hope Flowers School trained and provided special education teachers and therapists to work with Palestinian students with trauma, learning disabilities, and autism. They had just been awarded a new USAID grant to expand this work into the local community. Now, my understanding is without this grant, the classes and staff helping students with autism will be eliminated. There will be no services for more than 200 children who get referred to the Hope Flowers School for a diagnosis and an educational plan. How could anyone think cutting off that aid is in this country's interest?
Thank you, Congressman Price. What I can tell you is that we're working under the Anti-Terrorism Clarification Act, or ATCA as it is called. As a result of the passage of ATCA, the Palestinian Authority at the end of January of this year requested that we no longer provide funding. And so we have ended all ESF projects and programs funded with the assistance and under the authority specified in ATCA in the West Bank and Gaza. Welcome the chance to continue discussions with you on the future of West Bank Gaza assistance. But as a result of the passage of that law, we've been directed by attorneys at the State Department and the USAID, and again, as a specific request of the Palestinian Authority to cease assistance. And so we're having to take a look at the very footprint of our operations there.
Well, there are reports, as I'm sure you know, that USAID tried to find a workaround to allow continuation of certain development assistance projects, but that request was denied by the White House. I'd appreciate your comment on that, and also it sounds to me like a fix to the Anti-Terrorism Clarification Act might be indicated. Would you support that? What would it look like?
We would welcome an opportunity to work with you with respect to that legislation and any changes that you would seek to make.
All right. Well, we, you know, the list is very long. What incredibly wasteful and counterproductive project involves Jericho, a nearly complete multi-million-dollar sewage network in Jericho. It's going to have to be buried under asphalt and abandoned. And at one point, and because of this pulling of aid, and just seems wasteful, seems counterproductive in terms of this country's interest, in terms of the kind of effort we all should concentrate on to strengthen the forces of moderation and democratic development in the Palestinian community. There are many frustrations here, but one of the bright spots has been our very targeted, very discriminating aid efforts, and this just appears to be a wrecking ball operation as we come in and wipe these away.
Look forward to working with you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman.
I would like to just follow up because my friend, excuse me, Congressman Price makes a very important point, and Mr. Green, assistance was stopped before ACTA by this administration review. And as you know, the United States is currently not providing bilateral aid to the Palestinian people in the West Bank and Gaza Strip. In my judgment, this is a decision that doesn't make any sense. It reverses more than 2 decades of bipartisan support for humanitarian, economic, and security assistance. And I have long argued that such funding with stringent conditions plays a critical role in improving the lives of Palestinians, helping to improve economic opportunity and providing stability to both sides in the conflict. Now, I don't want to put you on the spot because I know you very well, but you're working for this administration. I'd like to know what, in your view, will cutting off bilateral aid accomplish, putting aside ATCA? This decision was made before ATCA. And if you could share with us the impact of these cuts, especially on the United States' ability to influence a future 2-state solution. Yeah, I'm still hoping, and I've been working for that for a very long time, a 2-state solution between Israelis and Palestinians. So ATCA is a problem, but this administration took that position before ATCA. And I just want to say, because I know my good friend was involved as well, people like Dennis Ross used to give me advice, lists of groups that were doing important work, which we funded in the West Bank. So if you can explain to me what will cutting off all bilateral aid accomplish, I would be most appreciative.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. What I can tell you is, and you're correct, in 2018, the President had a review of U.S. assistance to the Palestinian Authority and in the West Bank and Gaza to ensure that these funds were spent in accordance with U.S. national interests and were providing value. And that review at that time froze the assistance that was going. And as a result of that review, we did redirect certain funds. And then on top of that came the Anti-Terrorism Clarification Act. and the resulting correspondence that we received from the Palestinian Authority. So I can tell you that that's how we got to the situation where we are. Obviously, we are all hopeful. We are hopeful in particular for a long-term solution that allows us to continue doing what we think is important work.
Well, I guess it's my turn. I just wanted to add to my good friend, because this is of great concern to me. We're waiting for this great peace plan that Jared and Jason Greenblatt, well, no, Jared's last name is not Greenblatt. Jason Greenblatt and Jared are waiting to produce, but I haven't seen anything yet. And I am very concerned now. I will say that I have met with a group like Arava, which is doing some important environmental work, working with those on every side of the issue, Palestinians and Israelis. So there are some groups like Arava. But since I'm asking the question now, maybe you can discuss further the impact of these cuts, especially on the United States' ability to influence a future two-state solution between Israelis and Palestinians. And maybe you can share with us, if you have any idea, does Jason Greenblatt talk with you or Jared talk with you? Do we know about this great peace plan while they're cutting off all funds that I think is so destructive?
I don't know the details of the peace plan. It's no surprise to you. I have met with Jason just once. This was some time ago. I can't tell you what the pillars of that peace plan are, to be honest. In terms of a full-on description of what the review and what ATCA, what the ramifications are, I don't have that at my fingertips, but I can pledge to you that we'll provide a briefing. We don't seek to hide any of that.
I think that would be very helpful, because we keep hearing about this great peace plan. Then on another day, we're hearing, well, maybe there won't be a peace plan. In the meantime, there is suffering. And for those of us who still have dreams of a two-state solution one day, and I've been in the Congress for a long time, but it seems that cutting off all aid takes us backwards and doesn't move forward in a positive direction. ATCA is another whole story, and I think that doesn't help in moving the process forward. But I would like to, and I know Mr. Price and others would like to have a complete briefing. I'd appreciate that. Okay, on another area, since we solved the West Bank and Gaza issue, the Russian government is pursuing efforts to undermine democracy, weaken multilateral institutions, reverse economic progress. If you could share with us, what role should USAID play in countering the malign influence of Russia in Europe and Eurasia? And does USAID have programs designed to counter Russia disinformation?
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, for that question. As someone who once led an organization that was declared undesirable by Vladimir Putin, it's an issue of particular relevance and significance for me. We are crafting and unveiling something that we call the Countering Kremlin Influence Initiative, and it really has several prongs. Number one is economic independence by those countries which Moscow and the Kremlin seeks to influence. So it's no surprise as to what they are. Countries like Ukraine, particularly energy independence. Secondly, working to foster independent media and media literacy for markets. I've seen a number of studies that show what Kremlin is trying to do in terms of their messaging and their media work, and most of it isn't attempting to convince everyone that the Kremlin is right. It is instead trying to undermine basic democratic institutions and to break apart coalitions. So I think we need to continue to have a concentrated effort to create media literacy so people can spot the disinformation and strengthen those independent media tools. I was in Prague not so long ago and had a chance to meet with some of the civil society groups based in that region that are attempting to do this work, and we will continue to support them. We think it's very important.
Since we have so few people here, I can't resist continuing this discussion for a minute. How has the administration's previous proposed spending cuts for Europe and Eurasia affected individual missions in the region? Does USAID plan to close or downgrade missions in Europe and Eurasia? Did I ask that question already? Oh. If you could respond.
Sure. We have no plans to close missions at this time. We naturally adjust footprints of missions around the world based upon changing conditions, progress that's made in self-reliance, but we do not have plans to close missions.
Now, as I understand it, the 2019 request would have cut assistance for the region by approximately 55%. I'd be interested in your view is what does this message send to our partners in the region, and how does it impact your job, USAID's effectiveness in pushing back against Russia?
Well, inevitably, cuts of that level, that significance, would force us to readjust operations and readjust our presence. Inevitably, those are the costs. So, yes, that would have forced us to reduce operations in that region and other areas affected by the impact. I obviously believe strongly in our team and our programs and stand up for them. On the other hand, we do the best we can with the resources we're provided to make them go as far as we possibly can and to prioritize countries on the basis of metrics like our journey to self-reliance, but restrictions and assistance certainly reduce that which we can do.
I don't want to put you into a difficult position, but as you know, members of this committee choose this committee because they have a real commitment to the work of USAID and the important role of the United States throughout the world. So perhaps we can have another discussion and talk with you about how we could be helpful in advocacy and helping you do your job, because we know of your commitment and we have a great deal of faith in you, but we're very disappointed in some of the decisions that are being made. Maybe they come from a lack of interest in some people in the administration. Maybe it comes from a real divergence in opinions about leadership of the United States, but I'm hoping that we can put together a briefing. And I know my good friend, Mr. Price, and his Democracy Partnership has been totally focused on how we can help move these governments in a positive direction. So perhaps, Mr. Price, we can have a follow-up briefing, which would be very helpful, because we are all, and I believe it's bipartisan, very concerned about these cuts that are being made. And I'd be interested to know on what facts they are based. So I thank you, and I'm very pleased. Oh, you wanted to say, okay.
If I might, just to provide a clarification for the record, in Europe and Eurasia, in the case of Albania, we will be entering into discussions on an evolving footprint there and what those programs look like. That is not an immediate mission closure decision, but just to, in the interest of full transparency, and this is not the first time that we brought this to your staff, but just to be clear, we are taking a look in Albania at adjusting programming as they continue to rise in their self-reliance.
Now, I don't want to cut you off, so we look forward to that briefing. But if you have any other positive information that you care to share that isn't a cut in program, I'm sure my colleagues on both sides of the aisle would be happy to extend your answer time. Or if you'd rather wait.
Well, I will just say I'm a big fan of the House Democracy Partnership, and I think it's the one program that's out there which allows us to not only reinforce democracy in countries, but also the dispersion of power. Oftentimes, at the State Department and at the country-to-country level, we think only chief executive to chief executive. But the value of the House Democracy Partnership is to build those legislative institutions that we all believe are the hallmark of Western democracies. And so I'm a big fan of the work.
Thank you very much. Mr. Rogers.
Thank you, ma'am. Let me hearken this back to the more mundane part of the world that deals with the bureaucracy. It has to be done. In my opening statement, I mentioned my concern about a top management challenge that the USAID Inspector General has identified many years in a row now. Vulnerabilities in your financial management remain a challenge, she says. One of the issues has to do with USAID's financial statements and reconciliation with the Treasury Department. Your books show one thing, and Treasuries show another. And they're off by hundreds of millions of dollars. It's something we should not ignore and work on, and you have worked on it. You've made noteworthy progress, she says, to address the problem, and yet it's once again identified in the IG's Fiscal 019 Top Management Challenges Report. In coordination with the OIG, have you developed a remediation plan to address issues with financial reconciliation?
There are two different pieces to that. Number one are recommendations with respect to management of programs and grants. And yes, in that case, we have been undertaking a number of significant reforms that will change the entire way that we do that. Secondly, what you're referring to is a historical fund balance with Treasury, $131 million, resulting from a change in our financial management systems. This resulted from USAID systems not properly recording all outlays. There is no evidence, as the OIG confirms, that we overexpended any of our accounts. We have identified and resolved the problems that have led to the discrepancies, and we are, in fact, working on a plan with OMB on how to resolve that imbalance.
When do you think that'll be okay, approved, and assessed and the like?
I'm sorry?
When will that be concluded?
I don't know. I can't tell you for certain, but we're working on it actively. The OIG sits in our regular senior management meetings, so we're in constant communication on that. But I'll make sure we get back to you with a specific timeline.
I would encourage you to get it over with. It's a
Yes.
burr under the saddle. Don't need to be there.
Right, and but I would say again, there's no evidence of an over expending. It's a discrepancy in outlay timings, but we will definitely work on that, and we'll get to you a plan, a timeline.
Secondly, and differently, you mentioned in your opening remarks about reorganization. We didn't give you a chance yet to expound on that, or expand on it. You have a different name for it, I think. What's it called?
Transformation.
Transformation. Tell us about it.
And it's called transformation at this point because we're in the implementation phase of the whole operation. So in terms of all of the measures that we have brought before you, The one that is furthest along is the creation essentially of a new Bureau for Humanitarian Assistance, and that's the CN that all 4 committees of jurisdiction have approved, and so we're in the process of implementation. Our commitment to you is to be transparent each step of the way so that you can see how we're doing it with full consultation, because we want this to be sustainable and we want it to last. We've provided a timeline to you that shows when and how we plan to take each of the steps along the way. Again, the Humanitarian Assistance Bureau being the furthest along. Another aspect to our transformation plans is captured by the private sector engagement policy that we unveiled last year, as well as the procurement reform that we're undertaking. People naturally focus on the structural changes because those are the most visible externally, but in many ways, it's the, if you will, the software of our changes, private sector engagement, procurement reform, that I think will have the longest lasting changes. The idea is, when we're done with all this, that we will have an agency that is more field-focused than ever before and is more nimble than ever before. All of the reforms that we seek to undertake have been led by career-led work streams. We wanted to make it clear that it's not a political or partisan matter. It's a matter of taking the best ideas that we can find from this administration and past administrations and taking the opportunity of the mandate of a redesign to try to bring them to pass in consultation with all of you.
I think there's 9 pieces of your transformation, and you have submitted those to us.
Mm-hmm.
We have evaluated them over the last months and years even, and I think we have approved 5 of the 9.
This committee has, correct.
This committee has, and yet it still needs to be done in the full committee and wherever else. Is it important that we approve these changes to give you this transformation you're referring to? How important is this?
It's very important to us because it helps us do our work more effectively and efficiently. You know, these are changes that need to be sequenced and we know will take some time. The Journey to Self-Reliance Metrics Framework is the first step that we've undertaken, but certainly we're committed to working with you and we would like to keep these on track. But yes, they are very important. They will allow us to be more efficient in what we do.
Madam Chairwoman, this is something important, I think, for us and him, more importantly him, for us to bear down and approve those 9 pieces of his reorganization so we can get on with a better way of doing business. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Mr. Kelly, let's turn to the Northern Triangle countries of Central America. Our foreign policy and our immigration policy in recent years has focused on these countries by virtue of the migrant flows, the huge numbers of families, women and children, unaccompanied children that have sought refuge in this country, have come north and turned themselves in, usually at the borders, and sought refugee status. I remember when this first occurred, when this pattern first became apparent. Ms. Granger led a CODEL to Guatemala and Honduras, and the then commander of Southern Command, General Kelly, flew to Guatemala City to confer with us. And I'll just speak for myself. It was the first time I had focused on the need for in-country support, in-country assistance in these triangle countries to make life more tolerable, to make life more secure, yes, but also to invest in health, education, other things that made it more desirable and feasible and safe for people to remain in those countries and not to seek to migrate. And General Kelly, others from across the political spectrum had a large influence, as you know, on the Obama administration and on Congress. And in fiscal years 2016, 2017, we worked with the Obama administration to increase assistance to that region by something like 50%. And it was a diverse package of assistance, but a lot of it had to do with conditions in the home countries that would enable people more safely and securely to stay there. When the Trump administration came in, and sent up their first budget, they proposed slashing assistance to each of those three countries. It was a devastating budget. I remember asking General Kelly how he accounted for this, and he really couldn't account for it. But whatever the reasons were, it was a devastating proposal, and totally ignored the reasoning, the very sound reasoning, I think, that had gone into those increases. Now, I give Mr. Rogers a lot of credit for this. Congress did not accept those budgets. Congress restored funding in Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador in many respects. We didn't fully do that. There has been a decline since 16 and 17, but the worst of the damage was avoided. On the other hand, the potential of this has not been realized, and so now we're awaiting another budget. We hope that the past is not a prologue here, but we'll see what the new budget looks like with respect to this item. But I want you to comment on it. You're someone in a very good position to know what might be feasible here. I don't mean budget-wise. I mean feasible in terms of having the desired impact. This clearly isn't a border security problem mainly. And so that's of course, not realizing that, we've in the past looked at the situation in the home countries and how to make some impact on that. So I wonder what you think the potential there is and what the consequences should be for the way we think about our foreign affairs budget in the Triangle region.
Thank you for the question. So what we are, well, first off, as you know, as a general matter, what we're trying to do in the region is to tackle the conditions that you and I both believe are drivers of irregular migration, problems of crime, problems of lack of economic opportunity, problems of a lack of meaningful education and workforce skills, and also governance, and all of this enhanced by corruption. Two things that we're trying to do that I hope will make our programs even more effective. Number one is trying to target our investments in those places the statistics tell us are the origins of many of those fleeing and heading north. So we're working with Customs and Border Protection to try to identify geographically what those communities are. Secondly, we are putting into our programs in the performance evaluation, trying to measure the impact these investments have on those who are heading north, so that it's a little bit better tailored. You and I both believe that the investments that we've been making are important and are having a positive effect. What we're trying to do is make that more precise so it's easier to document, and we can make sure that we're placing them right where they need to be in terms of those investments.
General Kelly, at about the time we visited, had written a much circulated article for Military Times. You may remember that. And he didn't quite use the term, but the implication was that something like a Plan Colombia was required for the Triangle countries in order to have the desired impact with all hands on deck in terms of government agencies and forms of support. We seem some distance from that now, but the prescription still may be on target. And so I think the kind of approach you're talking about, of course, the funding level is important, but also a discriminating appreciation of what kinds of aid have the most impact and where we should be targeting our efforts. That's important as well. So we simply must work with you on this, and we appreciate your attention to it.
First of all, I want to say thank you to my colleague. When Ms. Torres was here, we were talking about that because I remember I was part of that Biden team. And I was looking at the numbers, 750 million 2016, 650 million 2012, 600 million 2018, 527.8 million, total of 3.528 billion for 4 years. Given the administration's focus on immigration, I know the administration would like to increase those numbers to provide assistance. I should keep the smile off my face when I say that, but these are important discussions, and I know we all are concerned with what is happening in that region of the world. And having been part of the original effort, I think it's important to Mr. Price, myself, both sides of the aisle, that we have an in-depth briefing. What did we spend? What did we accomplish? What can we do differently? And I thank you again. The importance of this issue is clear to this committee. Thank you for bringing this up again. And I know Ms. Torres and many of us will work on it. So thank you so much. Mr. Fortenberry.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Administrator, let me just put everything else I've got on the table, and then we'll try to unpack as much as we can. Haiti, Colombia, Farmer to Farmer, and the new Delta Act. So let me start with Haiti, maybe if we have a little time to get to Russia after all that. As I know you're aware, Haiti is one of the larger recipients of United States aid, and understandably so. The conditions there of, again, structural poverty being in our neighborhood is just such a deep scandal for so many of us. The country's dislocations, the current political upheaval, and on make your work there both very important and very difficult. But one of the underlying issues, obviously, well, it's not obvious, this is a problem, is the border area between the Dominican Republic and Haiti. The consequences of economic dislocation because of the, let's say, underground movement of goods there or movement of goods there that defy both market logic and disrupt the economy of Haiti are one of the key areas in which I think we need to focus on. We put in the bill last year some considerations in this regard. Could you address that? Let me secondly move to Colombia right quick. One of the principles in the Colombian Congress had spoken to me one time about if they just reforested the acres that they have lost due to the FARC and that war against them, that could potentially offset 20% of the emissions in the United States. Again, reforestation as a part of the broader conservation set of initiatives actually gets us all to a place where we agree on the approach to environmental stewardship and the impact of man-made activity on the environment. Farmer to Farmer, my predecessor, Congressman Doug Beereiter, who I happen to see this morning, conceived of this idea, a great concept linking farmers across America who have expertise with some of the world's poor to help them advance. As we look at Feed the Future countries and better coordination of strategy there, using a program like Farmer to Farmer as a pull strategy that actually implements two things: our expertise worldwide to fight against hunger and create the right types of long-term structural development there in agriculture space, but also enhancing diplomacy, to me, is the right thing to do. We tried to reform Farmer to Farmer in the Farm Bill. We got part of the way there. Part of a metric that I think we need to use is what we call yield gap analysis, which actually can determine whether or not what we're doing in the Feed the Future countries is actually resulting in the outcomes that we want to see in terms of addressing the needs of poverty and hunger. Finally, the Delta Act, very proud of this initiative. You're familiar with it. Defending economic livelihoods and endangered animals. What we've done here is basically create the possibility of trinational conservation area between Botswana, Angola, and Namibia to protect the extraordinary ecosystem of the Okavango Delta. Beyond that, though, thinking about, again, the creative ways in which conservation and preservation of delicate ecosystems actually lead to economic livelihood, and then promote almost unimaginable possibilities in new emerging diplomatic relations in areas in which we in the past have had some difficulties. So you got a minute and 30 seconds to do all that. Unless, Madam Chair, you'll be kind enough to extend me a little flexibility.
And thank you for the questions. I traveled to Haiti in December, and it wasn't really until that trip that I took that I began to appreciate just how much the dysfunctional border between Haiti and Dominican Republic impacts the economic prospects in Haiti. It is hard for me to see Haiti becoming at all self-reliant as long as you're having the problems that we are of smuggling of goods and ineffective revenue collection in that DR Haiti border.
Can I stop you there? Madam Chair, would you be willing, perhaps with Ms. Lee, to go deeper into this issue? Because all of the good work that the administrator and we are trying to do in Haiti is impacted or undermined potentially by this singular problem. And it's a severe dislocation, but it's not well known.
But I think you probably remember that we had a briefing, was it about a year ago? Or 2 years ago? I don't remember. But two of the best people USAID has ever had, what were their that were assigned to Haiti. They were extraordinary. Now, I went on my honeymoon to Haiti a long time ago.
Really?
I've also been to the Dominican Republic. Ever since, that's right. I won't go into details about that, but I would like to say that was probably one of the best briefings I ever had. And I think what you're saying is important because I was so proud of our representatives. I wish I could say that the results equaled the talent and expertise of our representative. We can go into this further, but I'd be most eager to work with you to get, I think my good friend, Mr. Rogers, was there as well. And
Were your honeymoon
they were
too?
out, I'm not, not on my honeymoon. It's a good thing I could be excused because my voice is so bad you don't understand what I'm saying anyway. But I'd like to follow up with you. All I'm saying, it seems to me we have this discussion, we put some of the best people there, and unfortunately the progress doesn't measure the talent, and I would love to have further
Okay,
discussion.
the point of raising it and using so much time is, again, if you could help us, help you with the right kind of language embedded in our bill that addresses this, because again, we did so as a first step last year, and of course that bill is just being implemented. Right. It would be helpful to us. I don't pretend to have a fullness of an answer here. I just know this is a problem, and we have a huge investment in Haiti. But the preconditions for that investment to be made whole rely on this, a successful outcome here. So can you help us?
Yeah, I don't disagree with you. Again, this last trip, I think, really laid that bare for me. I met some young entrepreneurs. They're working hard at it. You saw some economic growth, but they were being undercut by smuggled goods, and they can't rise. I mean, it's impossible to have a full, vibrant economy with a dysfunctional border like that. So you have my commitment. We're starting to put together a working group. Haiti is a country that has tremendous bipartisan support. We all want to see success. So I would very much like to take it on with all of you.
Okay. Reforestation, farm to farmer, and Delta.
Farmer to farmer, we have expanded the grants from fiscal year 2018, and we're trying to embed that more with our cutting-edge research capabilities. As the son-in-law of a farmer and a believer in the farm diplomacy, we want to keep expanding that. We think it's like the Peace Corps, it's American diplomacy at its best.
Let's brand it.
And
I think the brand's been lost.
let's work on that. And in terms of reforestation, we think this is, it's sound from a biodiversity point of view, but it's also really important economically. Unless we create economic self-interest in the areas around these parks, there's no reason that parks and forest land are going to survive. Creating economic vibrancy so that people have a stake in the park's survival is key. We've seen it work in so many places, so we'd like to reinforce that.
So you'll have an implementation plan on the Delta Act?
Sure, yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
To be continued.
Yes, ma'am.
Ms. Rovey.
Well, I'll be brief and allow you to answer the last part of my previous set of questions. But, Madam Chair, one of my children once complained about not wanting to go to school, and why do you not have to go to school, Mom? I think today's hearing is, as are many, is evidence that we learn a lot in this job every single day. And I'm grateful for the opportunity to continue to work on a deep dive with all of the specifics of these very necessary programs that exist throughout the world. And so, again, I just can't tell you how grateful I am to be here, and I appreciate your taking the time to be with us. The last part of my question is very open-ended, and will give you an opportunity to tell us what you want us to know. But how can Congress, what do you need from Congress right now to continue the important work of your agency? And in the immediate future, what do you foresee as being a pressing policy or budgetary matter that you want us today, here, right now, to be aware of?
I think it's continued attention to at least one aspect of Mrs. Lowy, the chairwoman, has begun to address, and that is how we provide basic services to displaced communities. What I always tell people, what truly worries me and gets me up in the middle of the night is the fact that we have 70 million displaced people in the world. We have children being born in camps, raised in camps. We provide nutrition, but we are not adequately tending to their needs to keep their connectivity to the outside world so that someday, God willing, the fence comes down, the gate opens up, they're able to be productive members of whatever society they're in. So I'm really worried about providing service in conflict, post-conflict, and crisis settings. With the chairwoman's leadership, we've been able to use the generous education funding to begin to address that. We're just scratching the surface. We have a long way to go. That is the single most important challenge I would point to for all of you.
I know you had a hard leave at 12 noon, but I really do appreciate the wisdom of all the members of this committee. And I would just say in closing, I hope this is not difficult for you, but I would hope you would give us a budget request that is real. Should I end it at that?
Yeah, sure.
So let me also say I appreciate your leadership. I thank you for your time. As you can see, there is a lot of depth of all these members. They're interested in these issues, and I'm hoping we can continue this discussion informally and help you by giving you the resources we need and the technical assistance that you need, frankly, to do the job. So I thank you so much. I thank you for both sides of the aisle for your wisdom. There is so much interest here, and we look forward to continuing to work together. And I hope our throats clean up. Hope you feel better. Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, I have to say this concludes today's hearing. The Subcommittee on State Foreign Operations and Related Programs stands adjourned. Thank you.